Tom Lawton, Head of Manufacturing at BDO. Tom, you've spent a lot of time in China and the Far East examining businesses there. What lessons can be learned from the way that the Chinese apply themselves to manufacturing?
That's a big topic, Will, as you know. But I think perhaps the most important lesson that we can learn is how important manufacturing is to the economy. And I think for a number of years, probably in the UK and possibly in some other Western countries, we forgot how important it was to manufacture goods that other countries wanted to buy and then to sell and export those goods. And I think the Chinese had a strategy from 30 years ago when they started to open up to develop manufacturing as a way of increasing employment, which was very important to them, obviously, starting to alleviate poverty, but more importantly, to export the goods that they made to the world and create financial wealth in order to continue to invest and innovate in the Chinese economy. And I think what we're seeing today is the outcome of 30 years of very, very focused work from the Chinese government. Have to say, it also helps having a population of something like 1.3 billion, which shouldn't be underestimated in terms of economic output and capabilities. But I think there's some real lessons there. One of the things I do like when I visit China is you can clearly see, and you know, we possibly wouldn't like it as much here, but there is a real focus by the state, that there's an absolute focus that an intention that they want things to happen in the way that they want to happen, and they can be quite directive in that. You know, a lot of the funding that goes into the big state banks will be released to the companies that they want it to be released to. Easier to get funding if you're in a sector that they want to expand than it is if you're a company in a sector that they don't want to expand. They will be very directive on the regions and what they want them to manufacture. I mean, fairly recently, the eastern seaboards are becoming more expensive. And oddly, the Chinese government want them to be more expensive, so the flow of lower value add work, if you like, moves to the west of China and starts to alleviate some of the employment problems in the west of China. And some of that state-directed, we might call it interference, they might call it model, is very interesting in China, because I think certainly for the past 30 years you have to say it's been very effective. And one of the questions in my mind, without turning into a state-controlled communist country, is are the lessons that the UK could learn in just applying some aspects of that framework or direction that I know a lot of manufacturers in the UK have been talking about for a few years now, is do we really have a long-term sustainable framework for manufacturing in the UK? My personal viewpoint is no, we don't. The question then is, how can we develop one? And how can we have a government clearly setting out that framework? And perhaps as importantly, how can we make that last for 20 years or 25 years and not be overly interrupted by political changes as and when they happen? We ought to have an industrial platform that has a lifespan that's a lot longer than the political lifespan.
I think that's most manufacturers would agree with that wholeheartedly, but I think perhaps the difficulty is it not that in a democratic or more democratic political system, things will change at the end of a parliamentary term. That's almost inevitable. You're suggesting we ring-fence some sort of industrial policy that outshines or outlasts a parliamentary term. Is that possible in a pure democracy, though? Is it genuinely practical?
Good question. I think it probably is. And a possible model that I might point to would be, say, the German model, which has interesting politics, to say the least, and coalition governments all the time. But they for a number of years, more than 20, probably 30 or 40 years since the war probably, have had a policy that says manufacturing is core to what we do in Germany. They've set up structures that support manufacturing. And they don't seem to have the same to and fro cycles that we have in the UK, because it's almost as if every party believes fundamentally that that aspect of the German economy is important and will be continued whichever party comes to power. Now, there's always going to be tweaks and nuances that different political parties bring to bear. But is it possible to have a strategy and a framework that sets out a long-term plan I'd like to think it was possible in the UK.
Now, there's been a lot of attention, understandably, on the importance of, or the crucial value of exports in this depressed economic cycle. We all need to make things and services included and export them to address our budget deficit. What is being done, though, to generate more trade with foreign nations, particularly outside the BRIC group, into the civets, the new emerging markets? What is being done? Should more be done? Should we encourage groups of private companies to organise their own trade missions, or do we rely more heavily on UKTI?
It's interesting. I mean, I'm a big fan of UK manufacturing and its achievements over the past 30 or 40 years. It's got through an extremely difficult series of decades, if you like, lost a lot of share of GDP, as everybody knows, but come through to the end of it in a reasonably strong way. We do have still a reasonably successful manufacturing sector contributing 13% of GDP. So lots of good marks for manufacturing there. And we are a very big export country. We're still one of the major exporting countries in the world. And most of the client base of BDO, for example, would be exporters of some kind. Many of them have subsidiaries overseas. So there's lots of good things taking place. I think as people focus more on manufacturing and talk more about exports, I'm sure more good things will take place as well. I do like the work that UKTI do. As you mentioned before, I've spent time in the Far East, and I've worked with UKTI in the Far East and CBBC in China. And they are very good and very supportive of UK industry. I think some of the trade visits that they arrange, excellent. They can be very, very focused. They can be very bespoke, all of which is great stuff. In answer to the question, are we doing enough? I'd probably say probably not. But you could answer in that way to most questions. Are manufacturers aware enough of the opportunities? I'm not sure. Are they aware of how quickly some of these emerging economies are growing? Probably not. Indonesia is one of the fastest growing economies of the world. 260 million people, probably the third largest economy in Asia at the moment, behind China and India. Presenting an interesting opportunity, and I'm not aware that a great many European countries, let alone British countries, would be exporting or targeting Indonesia as an export marketplace. And perhaps where UK manufacturing can revisit how it thinks of itself within the world is to try to be ahead of the waves as these emerging economies develop themselves and start to look for the products that we might be able to provide, and just get in front of the curve and get there ahead of the Germans or the US or increasingly China to establish our skill sets. One of the problems that we did have for a number of years, I think, to be fair, is, and I know this sounds odd for such a broadly based manufacturing company, we probably didn't have what the rapidly emerging economies of that time wanted, which was I think machinery that manufacture things. They didn't particularly want finished goods or innovative components. They just wanted machine tools and equipment to help them manufacture for what they wanted to do. And we didn't have that. Germany did in spades. Why is Germany so big in China? It's invested there for a long time, but it sells what they want to buy, full stop. Hopefully, though, as the cycles move and these countries become a bit more developed and they've built the manufacturing industry, they start thinking about, we need a slightly more advanced component, slightly more value added, or a different sort of manufacturing service. And the things that we do then as a UK economy and a UK manufacturing base might start to be valid for them. And again, it's, can we get there in advance of the other countries that we're competing against?
And with the strong focus on exports, I feel perhaps we've taken our eye off the ball on potential areas of domestic growth. We mustn't discount the domestic economy, even though it's depressed at the moment. Where do you see there being more domestic opportunities?
I think the obvious big one is in renewables. The renewable sector in the UK does seem to be the most promising one that we have. I think the wind farms, the wave power, nuclear industry that is projected to come through, all of which will be located in and around the UK, clearly, so there's not much to export there. and we have a massive skill base to provide services into those growth areas. The challenge is, I think, from what I've seen so far and from what I know about UK companies, I'm sure there's one or two that can do it, a lot of the lead contract work is going overseas. You know, Siemens, wonderful company, employs a lot of people in the UK, so that's great. And they're here and they're growing rapidly. And those companies, I think, should be encouraged because they do create employment and growth for the UK economy. And I can see significant growth in the area of renewables over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. What I'd probably like to see, and being slightly biased and political, is just more clarity that we want that renewable growth to help drive the manufacturing industry of the UK. So even where the lead contractor might be an overseas contractor, I'd like to be as encouraging as possible that the supply chain that supported that lead contractor was UK based. And probably goes against all our capitalistic instincts and free trade and all of that, but I think that would be very, very helpful for us to see that immense amount of spend that we're going to spend on our renewables infrastructure over the next 20 years or so, as much as possible supporting UK manufacturing growth and jobs.
I think with the perhaps with the offshore wind turbine factory in Hull, I think Siemens have pledged to keep quite a lot of it
Absolutely.
Domestic supply chain. Let's hope they fulfil that. Earlier we talked about the importance of innovation, and I think you mentioned offline that the latest model now for the West is to reinvent itself more rapidly than it has before, because certainly competition in the Far East will reproduce comparative advantage within a 3 to 5 year cycle. It's very quick, so we've got to keep on our toes. What's your view on the TIC, the Technology Innovation Centre, and the type of work that the Technology Strategy Board has done to try to replicate, if not copy outright, the Fraunhofer model?
I think it's a great idea. And actually we work quite closely with the Manufacturing Technology Centre based in the Midlands. And I think it could work really well. I think the idea of taking some of the fantastic research that we still do in our universities, which is really excellent, and trying to turn the best of that into commercial production ideas, and then taking it to manufacturers that might be able to make that happen, is really a great idea. And again, that seems to have worked very well in Germany. I think it's worked very well in other countries. Probably China is a mini example. I think in South Korea it's probably also worked well, as they've developed what is now the 6th largest manufacturing base in the world, surprisingly.
Helped by their own version of the Fraunhofer.
Yeah, helped by their own version of trying to create that little bit of innovation, that spark that makes people want their products. And often it's cost led. I mean, the world nowadays, I think you have to say, there's a place for quality, but I don't think the focus on cost and value will go away. And I think that's where UK innovation can work really well, and that's where I see the TIC model helping a lot. You know, how can we develop ideas to make what we do more effective, more efficient, lower cost? Because again, that will help produce our sales and our exports. And I think it's a really, really valuable idea.
Do you see any signs just yet that these high-value manufacturing TICs are genuinely, on a practical ground level, helping companies get ideas to market, or is it a little early to tell yet? Because you work with the NCC, don't you? Yeah,
it's quite early, but I think from talking to the people I talk to in those innovation centres, and particularly the one I mentioned, it does look like they are starting to take ideas forward and turn them into commercial, practical advantage. I mean, I'm always in awe of when I listen to particularly research-based manufacturers telling me what they're going to do and how they're going to do things to a product to make its manufacture more simple, more effective. You know, it's absolutely wonderful. And certainly what we're seeing in the Midlands Centre is some very, very interesting technology that's coming through now. And I know that they are working with some commercial partners to help them take that through to commercial use.
So fingers crossed we'll see more of the same.
Hope so.
Well, Tom Lawton, BDO, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.